Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's talk. My name is Cleide Klock. I'm a journalist from Brazil based here in Los Angeles, and our special guest today is a business leader in entertainment and media. He founded in 2018 a Web3 download video on-demand platform, a destination for movies, television, live events, digital collectibles, and much more on the blockchain and within the metaverse. So everything we need to talk about nowadays. Please welcome Michael Esola, founder and CEO of Ficto TV. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Clyde. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk here today about the future, but also about the present. And first of all, please, I'd like to hear from you about Ficto TV and what makes your platform unique.
Well, we're one of the first ways you can watch content as a consumer by using cryptocurrency to purchase movies, shows, short films, live events, or even just digital collectibles known as NFTs. You don't have to use cryptocurrency. You can use regular credit cards as well. That's called a fiat on-ramp to be technical. But by opening up to cryptocurrency, the actual transactions themselves can be super, super small, right? Like, for example, when you go to iTunes, we're all familiar with that, or like Voodoo or wherever, Roku, like if you buy an individual movie, usually they're like $3.99 or $5.99. They're never like 10 cents or 5 cents, or they're never even like a half of a cent, right? And that's because credit cards, you got to spend a little bit of amount of money. Otherwise, if you lose in the transaction. But with cryptocurrency, it's amazing. You can do fractionalized, sale prices, and that opens up a whole host of opportunities for artists to, name their prices on anything. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but it is free, no subscription, no ads. And when do you have to buy this content? Because I saw many content, many things, many series for free.
Yeah, so right now, all the content since we started was free, right? And that's important because a certain portion of every platform you should have free content because not everyone wants to pay. But it will be up to the artists as we've changed and actually brought on more crypto transactions over time if they want to start charging and when they want to start charging. So for example, there could be a show with 10 episodes and the first 5 episodes could be free. But the second 5, or even maybe just the finale, they could charge $1, they could charge $5. The artist could charge $200 for that final episode if they wanted to. It's really up to them and their fans and their communities and how they all work together.
Mm-hmm. And when, how, and why did you have the idea to make this Ficto? And what kind of problem would you like to solve making it?
Yeah, so I was an agent before I founded Ficto, an agent who represented directors and writers and creators and showrunners. I work with Ari Emanuel, and there's a company called WME, it's now called Endeavor, and they based the show Entourage on him, right? But so if you ever seen the show Entourage, that's what I did for a living, right? Now, when you represent artists, you advocate for them. You do great deals for them, you find them work, you put together things for them. And what was very apparent to me, after I was doing it for 17 years, was that streaming was becoming the preferred choice of how people view their content. But the thing about streaming, which most people don't realize, is that there's no back-end payment, right? There's no payment based on performance of your content, right? So before streaming existed, not to be confused or anything like that, you would go to the movies, right? And if a movie performed really well and it did really great sales at the box office, those artists would get called, would get back-end payments or performance-based payments, whatever you want to call it, right? And that was really key. That's economics, that's capitalism, that's what makes it all work, right? But when streaming came along, Netflix namely is the first, and now there's lots of other streamers, they said, we're not going to pay any money based on performance. We're just going to pay you a one-time fee, and that's it. And that was devastating to me as an agent who advocated artists because, you have to really, be somebody huge to get a large payment up front and someone established, but all the people that were coming up, they all got really small quotes and they were only making a little money.
Mm-hmm. And
so with Ficto, we've changed that, obviously. So, you know, we're building a streaming service. Really, it's a platform rather than a service where they can see and own all their analytics. They can understand all performance, and the sales of their content go directly into their pocket. And we only charge 20% in the sales. And so if you go to iTunes, they're going to take something I think 40%. And if you go to Amazon Prime or Vudu, they're going to take 50%. We only take 20% at point of sale.
Do you consider this big innovation? This is a big innovation for Ficto?
Yeah, it's pretty different. I think, you know, when we first started out, it was founded in 2018, but we really started rolling it out in 2019. When we said that all of our content was running on a blockchain, people will look at us like we had three heads. They're like, what's a blockchain? And once they started understanding it had something to do with cryptocurrency, they got really weird about it, investors, and we're like, well, we don't like cryptocurrency because that's bizarre. So we literally had to minimize any discussion or any description of cryptocurrency or blockchain. It was, even though we're running our content on blockchain, we didn't talk about it, right? So, but things have changed a lot. Just in the past 6 months, it's been incredible. Everyone sees the NFT sales. Everyone sees like people talk about and get rich on that. But there's an underlying technology, you know, with cryptocurrency and NFTs, and that's called a blockchain. And that's really exciting. And it's not just changing the way we consume content, but it's changing everything, the way you bank, the way you, real estate transactions, healthcare, you name it. Every industry is being affected by it.
I want to talk more about that, but first I want to talk about the content. I saw many series and on Ficto, I love it. Many different kind of videos there. They are short, right? From 3 to 12 minutes, most of them, I guess.
That's where we started. We started with an emphasis on mobile short content. However, we've now expanded since that, and you're going to see a lot more full-length movies and full-length TV shows on the platform. We initially rolled out just our iOS and Android, you know, telephone or whatever. Telephone sounds really old. Smartphone apps, right? And now that we're launching the connected TV apps, you'll see longer viewing formats.
But is it working only here in the United States or abroad?
No, it's global. It's available in all major countries, and it's, you know, we can geolock things, but you know, we try to be everywhere.
And what do you intend to have more there about the content? What is in your mind about that? Well,
first and foremost, it's a marketplace. So as we increase and get, you know, content on board the platform, it will have a real scale to it, you know, and there'll be automated, you know, discovery features, but you could type in a search engine just like you would Google or YouTube. However, we're really going to emphasize a layer of curation on top of that will be led by moderators, and those moderators will be artists and their fan communities that support them. So I say that because it's really key that we find those niche communities that really are underserved, frankly, and the fans that watch those types of shows and that content. Where, for example, we had there was a show called "I'll Ask the Stupid Questions" starring Amber Louis, a K-pop star.
I love it.
Oh,
actually.
Thank you very much.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, Netflix passed on, Disney Plus passed on, a lot, you know, services passed on, but we picked it up and it got over 1 million views in the first 24 hours. And K-pop, you know, is a largely, it's getting better, but it's largely misunderstood in terms of the audience, even just in North America, and the sort of loyal fan base there. So I don't think Disney Plus is ever going to make a really big foray, for example, in the K-pop. It's not part of their model. So it's just one of many examples of niche audiences that are underserved that we really want to focus on.
But the content on mobile devices and content for normal streaming are different. And what do you ask for the content creators to have in their shows, for example? Is there any special question that you may request? Yeah.
We really want to democratize it as much as possible. There's always going to be a minimal amount of restrictions because we can't, you know, all the stuff, you know, like Facebook in the world, and you know, like we're not going to have, you know, let's say content that would hurt society, right? Like, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But outside of that, it's really it's a platform, meaning like your point of view, right? It's really important to preserve that for artists, because even if something's experimental and you may not like it, somebody else in the world, may. So it's got to be democratic in that way. And we're really not instilling any sort of requirements outside of those protective ones that I mentioned.
But do you think, is there any special content that people want to see on a cell phone, for example, and not in a big screen?
Yeah, I see where you're going with your live questioning, and that's a really good point. So first, on the baseline, in terms of the marketplace, we're not going to have any restrictions. Anyone can, do something that's professionally produced. That being said, we do search out as a company. We seek out, that niche programming. I'll ask stupid questions, or another show we have called Represent, about Olympic surfers when females were first admitted to compete in the Olympics in surfing. We'll seek those things out. And we'll put them in a featured section and curate that and really highlight that, just like if you were to go on OpenSea for NFTs. NFTs aren't sold on OpenSea like they would be on YouTube. Like, YouTube is literally just a search engine, and that's it at the end of the day. But OpenSea has different categories, like we have different categories. That's layered on top of sort of unlimited search possibility that drives the whole platform itself. So we will and continue, we have been, and we will continue to look for underserved audiences. We'd like to find content and highlight that content that you would otherwise find on HBO Max or Peacock or Netflix, stuff that might, emphasize more, minority starring, shows and movies, or, subject matters that might be more docuseries, or things that might not be overtly commercial, but surprisingly, when they start to gain traction with an audience, we might get, tons of viewers. So discovery is really important.
We said before about the digital collectibles, NFT. We talk about blockchain and metaverse, and let's go deeper now, please.
Yeah.
Could you explain how all of this work in your platform?
Yeah. So, a lot of people throw out these terms, and I have to say, like, on a daily basis, I talk to a lot of people about this. It's surprising that people are overwhelmed. Like, the average consumer, the average person, and I don't blame them, they can't wrap their head around, well, what is a blockchain? What's cryptocurrency? What's an NFT? It's a continued question that I get. So I've really actually, spent a lot of time, talking to people about it. And once you sort of get the essence of it, it gets really easy after that. So that's what I want to say first and foremost. I think it all comes down to really understanding what a blockchain is. Because remember, a blockchain is not cryptocurrency. Blockchain is not movies. Blockchain is just a type of technology, right? And it really goes back to Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and Web 3.0, right? So if you stay with me on this explanation, I'll do my best. Yes. So Web 1.0, as we know it, when it first started, when the World Wide Web first started in the early 90s, okay? Netscape and other things like that, it was just static, 2D, if you will, images. You go on a website, you scroll down the page, that was pretty much it, right?
Web 1,
you couldn't,
right?
Yeah, that's Web 1. You couldn't post pictures on there. You couldn't tweet things. It was one-sided. It was like a newspaper, right? A digital newspaper, just giving you information. That was Web 1.1, right? Web 2.0 came along, right? And that's allowed social media, because it was an exchange where you could post things, you could do certain things where, like, that web, when you open Facebook on your computer, it changes, right? Like, it's constantly, it's based on people interacting, right? And because of that, this is really important, applications or apps as we know them were able to be invented. And smartphones run on applications, because those applications, you might take it for granted, they're constantly interfacing with the web, right? Just like you're interfacing the web on your laptop or computer when you post something on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., right? And now when you think about applications and how different that was on smart devices, that really changed everything, right? And there's a whole host of other beautiful things that come with applications in terms of the ease of use. Like Uber has really demonstrated what applications can do. Banking apps, there's a whole level of security protocols that really people do take for granted now that come with that. Now, if you, before we get to Web 3.0, if you, just to review, Web 1.1 was one-sided, very static. Web 2.0 was interactive, going both ways, right? Web 3.0 comes along where we're at just right now, and people are still trying to, define it a bit, right? But it actually creates a database, right? And the back of all of that Web 2.0, Web 1.0 stuff, there's a back end that's invisible that you don't see and I don't see. That database is public. This is the crazy thing, right? That database has to, what I'm going to call it, has to prove itself out constantly. But this is what a blockchain is, right? Just imagine you have an actual chain, right? Not a rope, but a chain. So there's links, all right, that all in a whole chain. You take one link and out of that chain, and it's being pulled really tight. The whole chain falls apart. It's gone. It's done, right? So that means every one of those links is a bit. It's a byte. It's a token, right? Therefore, the whole system depends on the validity, all right, of it working. So you can't corrupt it. If you corrupt it, the whole thing comes crashing down. And so the whole Web 3.0 is built on that transparent trust. Your information, you know exactly where your information is going, you know who's taking it. And if you don't want it, you have to notify them, and then the blockchain alters it, and you get removed from that chain, and it gets fixed, and the chain still gets going. It gets maintained. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I really think it's important for people to understand these things. And Web 3.0 is really exciting because what I just described in a very abstract way, it affects everything, payments, financials, everything. So sorry, it was a long explanation.
We can see already in the gaming market, the game market in the metaverse and blockchain, I guess. I don't know if I'm correct. Please correct me if I'm not correct. Fortnite, Roblox, you can buy this Robux. Sometimes my son asks me to please buy this Robux for him. And how about the streaming market? It is a new phase that you are entering now for the streaming market too. How you can see that working together?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So streaming was invented by Netflix. Let's give them credit where credit's due, right? They invented what's called CDN technology. Before streaming existed, in order to watch something online, you had to download an entire MP4 file. And this is going to really make me sound old, but I mean, you'd sit there on your computer. It would take sometimes 15 minutes or a half hour to download a high-res MP4 file. And no one wanted to do that, right? And so Netflix came along, they invented CDN, and it basically allowed you only download a certain tiny portion of it, what you're watching in that exact moment in time and maybe the next 30 seconds ahead. That's called buffering, segments. And there's millions of that buffering going on when millions of viewers are watching that same MP4 file, essentially, right? So that's really important, right? However, our content on Ficto is different. We don't use a CDN, right? It comes out of a blockchain, which is more efficient, so we can deliver it faster, right? Now, because it's in that blockchain, it's all recorded, we can associate values with that in terms of money. We can associate views with that, and that's all reportable to the viewer or the artist or both. It's constructed in a way in which you get all that information. Because remember, when you're watching Netflix, you have no idea who else is watching that show. You don't know how popular it is. And that may not really bother you as a consumer, but I could tell you as an artist, when you put something up there, or at Netflix, you do a deal and they're not telling you, or you're not seeing it, there's no transparency. And that's really important when you're talking about lots of money, right? These things all come into play with the blockchain, because once the database is transparent and accessible to all, Web 3.0, it really democratizes everything. It flips the coin, so to speak. Right? It empowers artists, empowers viewers to make decisions based on better informed information. I hope that answers. I don't know if I answered the question directly. There's a lot to chew on.
But and what do you think we can expect in 1, 5, and 10 years?
Oh,
how fast is going to be?
Where streaming is going? Well, great question. So you may agree or disagree with what I'm about to say, but I typically look at streaming. It kind of all feels the same, right? Netflix came along, it was new, right? Like the whole interface is streaming. But then you had all these new streamers pop over the last 3 or 4 years, and they all basically copy the look and feel and smell of Netflix. It's surprisingly like, they say in Hollywood, there's a phrase, it's first to be second, right? Netflix was first, and then everyone basically copied that. Not only just copied the look and feel and how you interact with your content, but they also like copy the business model, subscriptions, and all that kind of stuff. But take mobile games, for example, because you mentioned one of those, or a couple of games. Most of those really popular games are free to download and actually free to play, but they actually do what's called in-game transactions, right?
Yes.
You get a weapon, or you get this, or go to the next level. That's interesting because there's all this research that suggests and shows us that there's a lot of people, particularly young people, that really don't want to pay for subscriptions, but they will pay at a given moment if they really value something, right? And that's how Ficto is built. It's on that premise. If you really want something, you could pay for it. If you don't want it, then you don't have to pay for it. But you certainly are not going to be locked up in some subscription every month. And you're certainly not going to be forced to watch ads, because that's a very old and antiquated model, as we all know, right? These are things that like need to be innovated, and there's an opportunity to do so. And I think the consumers right now are screaming at it. And I'm not going to try to, jump on, the tragedy of Netflix right now, but they lost, and I haven't seen the stock market, but as of this morning, they lost their largest amount of subscribers to date. And as a consequence, their stock plummeted the largest amount in any single day transaction. 40 billion they lost. It's projected today, right? Yeah. It's a lot of change in a short amount of time. And it's exciting, but it's also very nerve-wracking. A lot of people's careers and their jobs are in this industry. But I just say to any other startup out there, whenever you have this much disruption in an industry that's not that old in streaming, right? It's an opportunity to innovate. And that's really exciting. And that's really good for consumers, because it's going to empower you. You're going to have more choices. And there's going to be many more things to choose from. And it's going to be better business models in the end. So.
It is interesting because they don't want to pay this new generation for apps or watch advertisement. They pay for avatars, for example, right?
Yeah.
They like to pay for avatars. Yeah. And how people can be prepared for this new world in terms of thinking about new production, movies, videos, and about creative process, and also a new business model. What do you think, sir?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When it comes to content, one of the biggest barriers, especially the really big content we're associated, like Marvel movies or whatever, the biggest barriers are the amount of capital that's required, and then casting celebrities or really big IP. But at the end of the day, I don't want to sound like I'm Mr. Capitalist here, but it all does revolve around money, right? Big actors charge big prices, et cetera, right? And access to capital, the more it becomes democratized through tokenization and sales, even as something like an NFT, right? And fundraising through that, it actually does empower those people that need that capital. And it all gets connected back, because if you think about it, when you have the barriers, when you don't have these sort of methods to raise capital, whether it's through crowdfunding, that's where it started first. And now there's all this, I keep using tokenization, or what's called tokenomics, different ways in which you can go out to the general public, right, and raise different funds. Before that, you had these closed doors where it was, very small group of people deciding what you should watch. They program to you, right? They decide on what's popular and what's not, right? Because after all, you have no idea what's popular on Netflix technically, because you don't even have their metrics, right? So they're deciding, and brands are deciding, Anheuser-Busch, Coca-Cola, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that if that works for them. But you know what? I think we need more than what does brands say we should watch, or what the top 6 or 7 movie studios say we should watch. Because time and time has shown, like again and again, right, that there are so many examples and stories of artists that broke through finally, right? Tyler Perry, a great example, right? I was at WME when he was a client, and no one would greenlight his movies. And finally, he just financed a movie himself and was first to the box office, right? Because he knew he had fans. He knew he could commit. He knew he had communities. That's going to happen more often. And the ability to do that, it's incredible with tokenomics. That's where it's going in terms of financing of content and the distribution and connection with fans. The fans get to be direct stakeholders in these projects. They get to actually speak their mind and influence through their communities. It's really exciting.
So Web2 was a promise of democratization that ended up with a few companies controlling the resources. Do you believe that Web3 is a real chance to get rid of organizations taking advantage of people creations?
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the direction of that freedom, way more than Web 2.0. If this helps, Web 2.0 was largely driven by advertising. If you really think about it, most of the money that's made up the value of Facebook today and YouTube and Google is advertising dollars. And vast majority of advertisers use really deceptive analytics to track you through cookies and all this other technology and obtain your information without you knowing. Web 3.0 is built on this way in which it's all transparent, like you own your own data, right? So the whole idea of advertising is super challenged. Like you'll still get advertising, don't get me wrong, but the way to monetize it, you're not going to see the entire windfall of the billions of dollars that built up Facebook, right? And that's a deceptive structure if you really look at it. And why am I saying this? Like you've already seen the cracks all over the place. Facebook has lost, I don't know, a fourth of its value, right? And this is before Web 3.0 was really in mass. So because all the markets and stuff are forward looking 6 months or a year, they see this coming on the horizon. So you've seen Web 2.0 already start to fall apart because of this. And I think if you really, like there's other aspects to it, but if you really just look at advertising, because that was the biggest driver, and that's, you know, the world revolves around money at the end of the day. When you're neutralizing that and you can't, you know, get this deceptive practice and all the information, that's really significant in terms of empowering you, the consumer, once again, where you control your own destiny. So I hope that answers the question a little bit.
And how creating content will look like in the era of metaverse?
Well, this is probably the million-dollar question, so to speak. No one really fully understands the metaverse, and it could be much farther away than we imagine. I mean, obviously, you can enter into metaverse today. There's the VR tools and all that kind of stuff, but it does require an incredible amount of coding and bandwidth and all those instructions like that. The biggest challenge for the metaverse, right? And I'll answer your question here in a moment, but just know is that it has to remain democratized, right? You can't have companies controlling metaverse. There'll be people trying to buy up real estate and access the metaverse, and there's going to be places in the metaverse that might be owned by Facebook, but the metaverse itself and the underlying code has to be neutral or democratic. Now, in terms of creating content and stuff like that, well, obviously, metaverse is a virtual experience, right? So you'd have to be creating virtual reality experience to address that gap. Now, we're making 2D, or in the market, 2D films and 2D shows and stuff like that, like the majority of content creators still are. But there could be a movie theater in the metaverse. There could be other ways to buy images and clips and stuff like that can be 2D. It doesn't all have to be 3D.
Only for finish, my last question is, do you think we need to think more about specific audience more and more all the time? For example, I saw in your platform, you have some romance, other scary movies. Yeah. And do you think the platform is going to be with everything or with specific audience?
It's a really good question. So this is where, again, I go back to Netflix and I give them credit, right? To think in terms of genres, those days have been over for a while now. Like a romantic comedy versus a Western, like that is how, the content business used to be, right? Instead of thinking like that, Netflix came along and they basically looked at audiences themselves and what the cross sections were. And it's surprisingly, not surprisingly, depending on what your vantage point is, extremely complex, right? Layer upon layer upon layer. So you can have a romantic, horror, sci-fi, Western, right? or Latinx, or you could have, I don't know, like Pacific Islander motor trends racing car show, right? Like that has that type of leads or cast, but that subject matter and something you would not expect. Like my mother, she's in her 70s or 80s. She loved Game of Thrones, but if you go to the typical sort of services, HBO Max, they didn't really think like that. Well, they had a box. They only marketed to the people they thought would like Game of Thrones, and she never got any sort of ads or information on Game of Thrones, even though she loved it. You know what I mean? Like There's a lot of people still operating the old model, but once you really layer in the complexities of that, it's exciting. So.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much for your time, for your information, and everything you share with us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure. Take care.